Did you know that manufacturing in Brazil is currently at its lowest share of GDP in 30 years? Yet the country's automotive sector just announced, well, its biggest investment cycle in history. Welcome. I'm your host, the one who reads all the dense reports and data sheets so you don't have to, and I'm joined by our resident expert to help us make sense of it all.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to connecting the dots on today's data with you. And that paradox you just mentioned, I mean, that is just the tip of the iceberg.
It really is. But before we jump in, let's just set the stage. Today is Monday, June 15, 2026, and the research and data collection we're looking at was finalized just a few days ago on June 11th, 2026. You're tuning in to Macroeconomy AI, and today's episode title is Brazilian Industrial Sector.
We certainly have a massive landscape to cover today.
We do, and we want to express our genuine gratitude to you, our listener, for taking this deep dive into the sources with us. We know your time is incredibly valuable. We encourage you to engage with the content today. Leave a comment or share your thoughts.
Yeah, we always love hearing your take on the data.
Absolutely. Our channel, Macroeconomy AI, is dedicated to bringing a compilation of analyses and news on macroeconomics, technology, and artificial intelligence. And to help keep the lights on, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Dataflow Analytics, empowering your business decisions with real-time AI-driven market insights. Simplify your data today at dataflow.com.
All right, let's get right into the numbers.
Okay, let's unpack this. If you look at the top-line macro numbers for 2024, they paint a pretty rosy picture. Total industrial GDP grew by 3.3%, and the physical production volume grew by 3.1%.
Right.
So on paper, if you're just, skimming the headlines, that sounds like a booming, incredibly healthy industrial sector.
It does sound positive on the surface, but this is a classic case of why we have to look under the hood. The data shows that general industry makes up 24.7% of Brazil's GDP. But general industry is a massive umbrella. I mean, it includes mining, construction, and utilities like electricity and water. The crucial sector, the manufacturing sector, or industrie de transformação, is sitting at only 14.4% of the GDP.
Wow. And just for context, back in 1995, that number was 16.8%. So we are looking at a 30-year low.
Exactly. And if you go back even further, like to the 1980s, manufacturing was an incredible 27.3% of their GDP. It has nearly been cut in half.
That is a massive drop.
It is. And the reason we separate manufacturing from general industry is that manufacturing is the actual engine of technological progress. It's the sector that drives complex innovation, creates high-paying specialized jobs, and, generates the highest value exports.
Right, because when a country just digs raw materials out of the ground, like iron ore or crude oil, that certainly creates wealth, but it doesn't create the same complex supply chains or technological advancements that, say, building a semiconductor or a commercial airplane does.
Precisely. It's a completely different level of economic complexity.
I like to think of measuring general industry versus manufacturing as being like weighing a whole car versus just looking at the engine. Both have weight, both contribute to the total mass of the vehicle, but only one actually drives the technological progress forward.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, you can have a very heavy car with a tiny, shrinking engine.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. The weight is there, but the propulsion is struggling. And we see this tension clearly in their trade data. In 2024, Brazil exported $337 billion in total goods.
Which is huge.
It is. And within that massive number, the sources note that manufactured exports had their best results since 1997. Now, the report specifically flags that this claim requires final official validation, but it illustrates a really important nuance.
Which is what?
That there are still highly competitive pockets of performance, even as the overall manufacturing engine shrinks relative to the rest of the economy.
Okay, so if exports are hitting potential records, but the overall engine is shrinking, something must be siphoning off the fuel internally. I mean, is this a lack of global competitiveness, or is Brazil dragging itself down from the inside?
Economists refer to what's happening here as premature deindustrialization.
Wait, premature, as in they are losing their industrial base before they're economically supposed to?
Precisely. If we look at countries like the United States or Germany, they also saw their manufacturing share of GDP decline over the decades.
Right.
But that was a natural transition. They became incredibly wealthy, high-tech service economies. They essentially outgrew traditional manufacturing. Brazil, however, is deindustrializing while it is still firmly a middle-income country.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, it hasn't reached that high wealth threshold yet, but the factories are still fading.
That brings us back to the why. So what's killing the engine? What is causing this premature shrinking?
Well, it is largely driven by severe structural internal barriers. The sources detail a well-known economic concept called the custo Brazil, or the Brazil cost.
Okay.
It is a calculation of the extra, often hidden costs that companies face simply by operating within Brazil compared to the baseline of international competitors. And the price tag is staggering. The data estimates this cost at 1.7 trillion reais every single year.
1.7 trillion. Wow. Imagine trying to run a 100-meter sprint against global competitors, but right before the starting gunfires, someone straps a 40-pound weighted vest to your chest.
Yeah, that's a very accurate way to put it.
That vest is the Custa Brazil. So what is actually in that vest?
The heaviest plate in that vest, according to 70% of business leaders surveyed in the report, is taxes. But it's not just the sheer amount of taxation, it's the paralyzing complexity of it.
Right, I've heard about that.
Historically, Brazil has had a tangled web of municipal, state, and federal taxes that often cascade on top of each other.
But aren't they fixing that? I mean, I've seen headlines about a massive tax reform.
They are. Brazil is currently undergoing a massive transition to a dual value-added tax system, utilizing two new mechanisms known as the CBS and IBS. This will eventually replace 5 different fragmented consumption taxes.
Which sounds like a relief.
In the long run, yes, absolutely. The friction is that the transition period lasts all the way until 2033.
Oh, wow.
So right now, in 2026, companies aren't just dealing with a new system. They are dealing with the administrative nightmare of managing the old, highly complex system alongside the gradual phase-in of the new system.
That sounds like a headache.
It is. It's a temporary pain meant for a long-term gain, but in the immediate present, it is severely suppressing competitiveness.
And taxes are just one part of the weighted vest, right? The data points out that energy costs and interest rates are absolutely brutal. In June 2025, the Selic rate, which is their baseline government interest rate, hit 15%.
Exactly, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, a 15% baseline interest rate completely drains investment capital out of the private sector. Well, if you are an industrialist or a bank looking to lend, why would you take the massive risk of building a new factory, buying expensive machinery, hiring workers, and navigating that nightmare tax code when you can just buy government bonds and get a guaranteed risk-free 15% return?
Right. It's like trying to convince someone to invest their life savings in a risky startup when the local bank is handing out guaranteed lottery winnings. It completely disincentivizes the very physical investments needed to modernize the country.
Which creates a severe strategic risk. The data shows that Brazil's gross fixed capital formation, which is basically their overall rate of investment in infrastructure, machinery, and equipment, is hovering between 16 and 18% of GDP.
Is that low?
Very low. To put that in perspective, countries like China or South Korea maintained investment rates of 35 to 45% during their intense industrialization phases. If Brazil stays at 16 to 18%, they simply cannot replace and modernize their tech park fast enough to compete globally.
And even if a company defies the odds, ignores the interest rates, and builds that modern factory, the report highlights a massive labor wall, specifically a severe shortage of STEM-qualified labor, science, technology, engineering, and math.
That labor shortage is creating a massive bottleneck for modernization. Because of this lack of specialized talent, only 23.5% of Brazilian industries are currently digitized.
Which is surprisingly low for an economy of that size.
Yeah, they are struggling to implement what we call Industry 4.0, smart factories, automation, and data exchange. Because you can buy the robotics, but if you don't have the workforce to program, maintain, and innovate with those AI systems, the hardware is useless.
Okay, I have to push back here because we set up a paradox at the very beginning of this deep dive into the sources. If things are so dire with the Keystone Brazil, the 15% interest rates, and the lack of STEM talent, why did the automotive sector just have its best sales year in a decade in 2024?
It's a great question.
And more importantly, why did they announce a 180 billion raise in new investments? I mean, that totally contradicts the dying engine narrative.
What's fascinating here is how the industry is mutating to survive. The auto sector in Brazil looked at the global landscape and realized they cannot compete head-to-head with China or the U.S. on pure battery-powered electric vehicles.
Right, they just don't have the scale.
Exactly, they don't have the battery supply chains. Instead, they are leaning heavily into a unique domestic strategic advantage, Hybrid engines powered by sugarcane ethanol.
Ah, flex hybrids.
Precisely. Brazil already has a massive nationwide infrastructure for distributing ethanol. You can pump it at almost any gas station in the country, and they have decades of deeply ingrained expertise in the sugarcane supply chain.
So they're playing to their existing strengths.
Exactly. So the auto sector is pivoting. They are bypassing the geopolitical bottlenecks of the global EV battery supply chain and doubling down on a transitional technology where they already have a massive domestic moat. It's an incredible survival adaptation.
Here's where it gets really interesting because this survival adaptation is physically redrawing the map of Brazilian industry. Historically, everything was hyper-concentrated in the southeast.
Mm-hmm. In places like São Paulo.
Right. Think of the state of São Paulo as a blend of Detroit's traditional manufacturing muscle and Silicon Valley's financial gravity. It was the undisputed center of everything. But because of those high costs and the search for new advantages, the industry is spreading out.
The geographic shifts are profound, and they map directly onto these new survival strategies. The center-west of Brazil is absolutely booming right now.
Driven by agriculture, right?
Yeah, it is being entirely driven by the staggering scale of agribusiness. We are talking about high-tech meat packing, massive soy processing facilities, and of course the ethanol production feeding those flex hybrid cars. It's actually the only region in the country that has consistently industrialized and grown its manufacturing share over the last 40 years.
Wow. And the Northeast is pivoting hard as well. Instead of trying to attract traditional heavy manufacturing, the ports in Ceará and Pernambuco, places like Cacém and Suape, they are attracting massive multi-billion-dollar investments in renewable energy and green hydrogen.
It's a very smart move.
Yeah, they are using their natural geographic advantages, which is an incredible, consistent potential for wind and solar power, to build entirely new industrial ecosystems from scratch.
We also have to mention the strategic supply chain vulnerabilities that are forcing some of these shifts. The COVID-19 pandemic was a brutal wake-up call for Brazil's health sector.
Oh, right.
It exposed a deep structural reliance on China and India for what are called APIs, or active pharmaceutical ingredients.
Just to clarify, the API is the actual biological or chemical component that makes the medicine work, right?
Exactly.
So if you can't get the raw ingredients, you can't make the medicine, no matter how many state-of-the-art pharmaceutical factories you have on Brazilian soil.
That is the exact vulnerability. It quickly escalated from an economic issue to a national security issue. Because of that, there is now a concerted, state-backed push to build a robust domestic complexo industrial de saúde, a health industrial complex, to localize the production of vaccines, biotech, and essential medicines.
And amidst all this shifting, scrambling, and adapting, you still have a glaring anomaly like Embraer. I mean, they are exporting commercial jets to over 70 countries.
Yeah, they are a massive success story.
They remain the third largest manufacturer of airplanes in their segment globally. It just goes to show that high-tech, incredibly complex manufacturing is absolutely possible within Brazil's borders.
Embraer is the ultimate proof of concept for Brazilian engineering prowess. But as the macroeconomic data shows, it remains a brilliant exception rather than the rule. It proves the talent exists, but the ecosystem struggles to replicate that success across other sectors.
So what does this all mean? When we zoom out from the domestic geography and look at the global stage, where does Brazil actually rank today? The report states Brazil is currently 15th globally in manufacturing value added. They hold about 1.21% of the global share,
Which represents a significant drop. In 2005, they held 2.2% of the global share. They've lost nearly half their footprint in global manufacturing in less than 20 years.
Ouch.
Yeah. And on the Global Innovation Index, which measures technological advancement and patent generation, they rank 50th.
So if Mexico bypassed their internal hurdles by basically bolting themselves to the massive U.S. consumer market through nearshoring, how did a place like South Korea achieve their industrial miracle without a U.S. border? I mean, why did Brazil fall behind while other emerging economies surged ahead?
This raises a critical question about national strategy and capital allocation. South Korea and China took a very specific path, massive, continuous state-led research and development that was deeply integrated with private enterprise. To give you a stark comparison from the sources, South Korea spends 4.8% of its entire GDP on R&D. Brazil spends only 1.2%.
That's a massive gap.
It is, but it's not just the amount, it's how it's spent. In countries like Korea, the vast majority of that R&D spending is driven directly by the private sector, developing commercial technologies.
And in Brazil?
In Brazil, more than half of that 1.2% is public spending locked within universities. While that produces great academic research, the country struggles immensely to translate that university research into industrial patents and commercial technology on the factory floor.
But the Brazilian government isn't just sitting by and watching this happen. They've launched a massive master plan to try and reverse this trend, right? The Nova Industria Brazil, or NIB.
Yes, the NIB is the new industrial policy valid through 2033, and it is incredibly ambitious. It is backed by 506.7 billion raise in financing.
Wow.
Most of this capital is being channeled through state-run entities like the BNDES Development Bank and the research financier FINEB.
That is a staggering amount of capital to inject into the system. What are they actually spending it on? Because the report outlines some very specific target-driven missions.
They are targeting the exact structural vulnerabilities we've been discussing. For instance, addressing the health sector vulnerability. One mission mandates that 70% of all national health supplies be produced domestically.
Okay, that makes sense.
Another mission aims to push the digitalization of industry from that current 23.5% up to 90% by 2033.
Okay, I have to stop there. How do you mandate a jump from 23% digitalization to 90% in less than a decade when we just established there is a crippling shortage of STEM workers? I mean, you can finance all the smart factory tech in the world with that 500 billion raise, but who is going to plug it in and program it?
You've hit on the exact friction point that economists are warning about. Capital injection alone cannot solve a human capital deficit.
Right.
The NIB relies heavily on the assumption that financing the demand for technology will naturally create the educational supply to meet it, which is a very high-risk assumption.
They are also pushing incredibly hard into the bioeconomy and sustainable aviation fuels, or SF. Looking at this plan, it really seems like they are trying to leapfrog traditional heavy manufacturing altogether. It's like they're saying, we missed the boat on cheap plastic goods and semiconductors, so let's go straight to dominating the green economy.
That is exactly the strategic pivot. They want to leverage their biodiversity and clean energy grid. But it comes with significant geopolitical and economic risks. The OECD has explicitly warned Brazil against returning to artificial protectionism to achieve these goals.
Meaning what, exactly?
Well, they strongly advise against using local content requirements or market reserves, which historically have led to bloated, inefficient industries that collapse without government life support.
It's an incredibly tough balancing act for them, because on one hand, international bodies like the OECD are saying, keep your markets open and compete fairly. But on the other hand, the Brazilian trade chamber, CAMEX, actually raised tariffs on imported steel and chemicals in 2025.
Yes, they did.
They did it specifically to block a flood of cheap Chinese imports that were threatening to entirely wipe out the domestic steel industry.
It perfectly highlights the modern geopolitical tension. How do you remain globally integrated and embrace free trade while protecting your domestic capacity from being hollowed out by state-subsidized superpowers?
It's a huge question, and just as a quick reminder to you listening, our discussion today of these economic policies, tariffs, government bonds, and specific market sectors is purely analytical based on the source data. We are not endorsing any viewpoints, and this deep dive into the data does not contain, nor should it be taken as, any financial or investment advice.
Absolutely. The data presents a landscape of an industrial sector at a true crossroads. They have the raw materials, an enviable clean energy potential, and a world-class agricultural base.
Yeah.
The challenge over the next decade is converting those primary natural advantages into complex technological value without repeating the protectionist mistakes of the past.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. When we think of the word industry, we usually picture smokestacks, rigid assembly lines, and sparks flying in a dark steel mill. But looking at Brazil's massive push into sustainable aviation fuels, green hydrogen, and the Amazonian bioeconomy, well, what if the future of Brazilian industry doesn't look like a traditional factory at all, but rather a massive, high-tech green laboratory? Will nature be Brazil's ultimate industrial advantage? Something to mull over.
Before we sign off, I need to share the following disclaimer regarding today's content. Disclaimer. This content has an exclusively informative and educational character, compiling data, projections, and analyses from public market sources. The material does not express ideological bias and does not constitute investment advice or financial, legal, or tax consulting of any kind. Economic and technological projections are subject to frequent revisions in light of new data and market facts. Likewise, past performance does not guarantee future returns. Strategic, financial, or patrimonial decisions require in-depth and personalized analysis. Therefore, always consult qualified professionals and specialists before making your decisions.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive into the sources with us today. We really appreciate you spending your time with us, and we warmly invite you to join us for future deep dives.
We have plenty more data to explore together.
That was today's Macroeconomy AI. We'll leave it here. You all stay well and keep an eye out for our new broadcasts. Subscribe to our channel, access the links, and follow Macroeconomy AI on social media.